Hi, this week we'll be talking about the year ahead with Gordon MacDonald. Gordon was the lead pastor at Grace Chapel in Lexington, Mass. He led InterVarsity, Denver Seminary. He's the author of dozens of books. He's one of our, if not the most frequent guest on our Church in Action program, one of the most frequent guests. I'm Charles Galda, and I'm president of Vision New England and your host for the Church in Action. Gordon, thanks for being back with us.
Thank you, Charles. I always appreciate your invitations.
Thanks. And so folks know you and Gail, and so I'm not going to ask you to share about where you've been and what you've done and things like that. But folks are always asking after both of you. And so can you maybe just give us an update on where are you guys today and how are y'all doing?
Gail and I have been married for over 60 years, and we still like each other an awful lot. We live in Concord, New Hampshire. Many years ago, we built a home up here, and my wish was that one day when I stepped out of the structural ministry of the church, that we'd be able to move here and find a place of relative quiet where I could write and mentor people and do things that are appropriate to the last 20 years of life. And it's all pretty much worked the way I felt it might. So we live here. When we are on the road, we love to be with pastors and Christian leaders of other groups. I write for a German magazine every month, and so it's a time of busyness, but we're both 85 years of age, and we're going to have to slow down one of these days.
Thanks. Well, hopefully it won't be too soon. But we wanted to have you on as our first guest of the new year. As we were talking about before we came on, this is our second time, so it's our tradition now. I'm going to be telling people. But really, you read widely, you think broadly, you talk to pastors all over. And so what are things that are on your mind today as you think about the church or church? What's on your mind today that you think we ought to be thinking about?
The time we're living in is a very dangerous time. Everybody knows that. No one has to be told that. Approximately every 70 to 80 years, the world goes through a convulsive event, usually a world war. We're 70 years beyond World War II, and as you and I talk this afternoon, we've got, I'm told, 34 nations at war in one way or another. The ones that we American people are most interested in are the ones in the Ukraine, and of course the one in the Middle East, where Israel and the rest of them are involved. I wonder if the church is ready for this. One of the things about World War II was it had a Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was a person who somehow had an insight to see what was coming, and he knew how to raise up young men, particularly. I'm sure there were women involved, but you don't know much about them. But Bonhoeffer was one who was saying basically, we have got to get ready. The world is in trouble. He saw where Hitler was coming from, and unlike very many others, he was very accurate in his predictions of what Hitler was going to give if he got into power. We don't have a Bonhoeffer today that I know of, or at least they're not in anything I know about. We need a theologian. We need a leader. We need someone who's able to look at these times and say, this is what's happening, and this is what God is saying, and this is the kind of people that you need to be in a difficult time like this. Now, it's very interesting. Everybody knows the name Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Very few people know that there were others who came along after the war, and were able to help Germany, for example, rebuild. So we need people of both kinds that are preparing us for the conflict we're in, and to help us to understand how, on the other end, we're going to be part of a rebuilding effort when some of these places finally find some peace in their time. We don't have a good theology of war. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
And so does that normally come out of the seminaries, or does it normally come out of just big thinkers who happen to be Christian, or where do we look for those voices?
They appear. Seminaries ought to be a good place. Sometimes you find faculty that are kind of out of touch with the real world these days because they spend their time in the library. But I'm not sure I'm smart enough to predict where they're going to come, but they will. I have this faith, this belief that God will send us a person one of these days who's going to tell us what we need to hear and show us what we need to say and to act. Um, I can't believe that heaven would let us down without giving us a person like that. But right now, I don't know who they are.
And they may not come out of America at this point.
Could come out of the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what are you when you're looking at the world situation? Then it sounds like you're seeing parallels between now and the 1930s, and we entered into a devastating world war, and there's certainly opportunities for this to move into that area. Is there I guess, is that a fair assessment of the way you're thinking about it? And is there beyond being waiting for that person, are there things the church should be doing today to
Yeah,
prepare?
the church needs to read a little bit of its history. I've had the privilege of going to Germany many times over the last 25 years to speak at pastors' conferences and things like that. I probably have now made my last trip. And but when I'm with my German friends, I've heard them say more than once, "You American Christians don't know your history." If you would take a hard look at what Germany went through in the 1920s and 30s, you would see where you're headed if some things don't change. And that's a very sobering statement. For example, the free church, as they call it in that part of the world, um, in the 1930s was very mindful of Hitler and what he was doing. And people would say in those days in the free church, um, Mr. Hitler, uh, Herr Hitler, doesn't quite know what's going on. His number two and number three people are hiding from him the things that are happening. But one of these days, his eyes will be opened and he will see what's going on. And all of this will change. I guarantee it. Many Christians in Germany thought that Hitler was a godly man because the rumor was that he had his devotions every morning in the Moravian prayer book. I can't document that, but it disturbs me because I've seen the same thing happen over the years here in America, where we make we come to conclusions about the person who is in power and well they're thus and such, and we're a little bit naive about what happens, for example, in Washington. So I'm one who's looking at the near future and saying, God has got to come upon us and raise up some leadership that we don't know about yet and show us where God's hand is in all of this.
Yeah, we certainly seem to be looking for deliverance from very flawed political leaders.
Our history as a theological movement, evangelical movement, is we always look for someone to come along to save us, who's got a right opinion, a way to say things. We have a history of saviors that come along over the years. Now we're looking on, maybe we're looking for another one.
And imagine we have a history of being disappointed looking for saviors.
Yes. The church, I was a child during World War II, and I have vivid memories of the church and how its people acted as the war broke out. I often recite for people what Sunday night services were. I was 5, 6 years of age, and our church would be packed to the gills on Sunday night with people coming to sing and to hear a message from the Word of God. But also there was something that in those days was very sad. I can remember as a small boy, my father would, after the song service part of the evening, My father would come to the pulpit and he'd have a piece of paper with the names of all the men and women who were overseas in the war. And he would read this list of names. And every once in a while, he would say something like this: John Smith, uh, killed in action, or John Smith, a prisoner of war. And when he said these kind of things, you could hear audible gasps out across the congregation, and people would gather around the family that had lost a loved one in that previous time. And at the end of this time, my father would pray a very earnest prayer for the families and for the one who was captured or one was lost. But there was a togetherness in those days that was very precious and very powerful. You could almost feel the Spirit of God's presence in the sanctuary as it went on. Everybody was wrapped up in the war. Even I, as a 5-year-old, I took my pennies and nickels to the offering basket to to make bandages for the men in service. You don't have that kind of involvement in world affairs today by many people.
Mm. We've insulated ourselves from it. It's the war is something over there,
Yeah.
and soldiers and their families, and sailors and their families, right? But it's not really us.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to last much longer.
Mm.
There's too much different now, and some of these wars, in one way or the other, are likely to reach places that we know too well.
Mm. And related to this whole topic is this what I perceive as is a change in anti-Semitism. And so it's strike. If I think back, my perception of anti-Semitism in the 30s, 40s, 50s here is it took on more of a tinge of snobbery, of we don't want those people around. Today, it seems much more hateful, and certainly in places violent and threatening. Given your historical perspective, do you see it differently in this country today?
Well, what has seemed to have emerged in the last several weeks or months, frankly, shocks me.
Mm.
I knew you never get rid of racism. You never get rid of the kind of thing that we're living with right now. But I always thought it had dampened down, and that we were a more mature people than this. What's happened in the last few weeks has really shocked me, and I'm not sure any of us quite know what to do about it.
Mm.
And once again, it's a place for leadership and to ask the question, what is our role in all of this, and what should we say, and what should we do?
And so, would you? Are there some fundamentally broken things that are leading us? Because it seems like the country's broken in a lot of ways, and not that it's ever not been broken in ways. But in your lifetime, does it seem more broken today? And what's happening? And it's spirit, maybe practically and spiritually.
Well, the family is breaking up.
Mm.
Children leave home and they go hundreds of miles away. So the parents and the child begin to, they have contact at Christmas time or something like that. There's a lot of Zooming. That's good news,
Mm.
I suppose. But the togetherness that the family used to have is gone now too much. And we old people, wonder where are our kids going to be in the next years. I think families are breaking down in terms of Christian faith, and we older people are still looking back to the days of Billy Graham and Bill Bright and evangelists of that type. The new generation never heard of them, and they're looking for a different kind of salvation. So the whole fellowship of the church has broken apart, and we're all trying to figure out how to put it back together again.
And so we would have used the term evangelical in past years for our strain of the church. That term has taken on such a political term. It's too loaded now, and it implies things we don't mean to. But the folks who would be evangelical, theologically evangelical, I remember you asking me one time, what is it about evangelicalism that leaves us feeling like we haven't done enough?
Mm.
And so now I want to ask you that question too. What is it about evangelicalism that leaves us like we haven't felt like we haven't done enough?
Well, we're a convergentist movement, always have been. The evangelicals are characterized as people who reach out and try to get everybody converted into the church. Um, I'm not sure that we're holding forward fast to that banner of passion for winning people to Christ. That's not there much anymore. And so one would ask the question, how does one become a Christian anymore? It's not by going forward and raising your hand and having 7 minutes of follow-up. Something is differently happening with the younger generation. They see coming to Christ in a different way than we do. And we're going to have to get used to that.
And you talked enough. So, well, let me come back to that a second, but let me go back to this. And so are there some things that you would point to and say, this next generation really has to solve for this?
Well, they're going to have to ask themselves, do we want a church like our parents had? Or what is the church supposed to be doing to guard my spiritual structure in life? It's a very serious question. And I said to somebody earlier today, I think I know my neighbors better than I know most people at our church. We only get an hour together, most of us, in the week program, and we only go to, I'll say not me, but most people only go to church now once or twice a month. So George Barner tells us. We've got to figure out, is this what the church is supposed to be like, or do we need to overhaul the whole structure to achieve new and fresh goals?
And you've talked before about these, and I had walked away with the recollection, although maybe I put words in your mouth, but these atomic moments in the church or atomic moments in the world, where in a period of 20 or 50 years, everything changed, and that we've been coming on those times more frequently. And so it almost feels like we're in a constant state of change.
Yeah, look at us now. We're in one of the atomic moments with the foundations of AI coming on board. I don't think any of us know how this is going to change life. All I know is I turn on certain commentators and they keep warning me, life is never again to be the same as it has been. And I keep saying, what does that mean? And of course, some of us older folks add, will we have the privilege of dying before that gets affected? Do we have to live with this new stuff, or is it time to go to heaven? Which, by the way, is another whole question that needs to be wrestled with in the church today. The eschatological one. What is heaven anyway, and how is life going to change?
I mean, once we're in heaven, or once the kingdom is here. And so any guidance you want to give us on that?
When I was a young man, I've looked at my sermons, and I rarely ever preached about heaven. It was too far away into the future. I had too many ambitions about the present. And then suddenly I reached my later 60s, early 70s, and heaven began to become a more real place. There was this shorter time between me and heaven now than there was when I was born. So I started asking questions about heaven. I must confess to you, I'm not impressed with streets of gold or mansions that are huge. They may have been ways that the writers found to influence the thinking of poor people in the first century. But I think we've got to reconstruct whatever we think our view of the heavenly place is today. What is it like that God calls us to eternal life? And words like beauty and fellowship and perfection and inventiveness and worship now speak a lot to me. I
Mhm.
don't know what those things would look like in heaven, but I expect to have those kind of experiences in heaven.
Hmm. And now we're talking. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, when you're 85 years of age, you begin to recognize, you better recognize heaven because it's coming soon.
Every day,
Yeah.
sooner. And so we were talking about these atomic moments where the whole world, and it does feel like we're in the. I keep using the analogy, we're in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, right? We have the ability to look back and say, well, here's how it's sorted out, and it's pretty understandable. But in the midst of it, they had no idea how it was going to work out, and it
Yeah.
feels like that's where we are. And maybe things will never work out. Maybe it will constantly just keep changing. But you asked a really good question: do we want our parents' church? And what struck me is we don't really have our parents' church today, I think. I think we have our grandparents or great grandparents' church because it doesn't seem like that model of church really was a World War II model. And maybe it was there before World War II, but it seems like it's organized in the way society organized in World War II. And we've never really changed it. And part of what we're grappling with in the church is that we're still trying to do church the God sanctified way from 1942
Yeah.
as opposed to what our society looks like today. Is that a fair critique, or do you think I'm off
No, I
base?
think you said it uh, rather well. But of course, we've had other atomic moments like the Civil War. Most of this hymnody that you and I would love to sing was all created in the Civil War just before or after it. Uh, and you see it in the military language,
Mm.
in the entertainment language of the old hymns. Uh, I, Gail and I love to ask the question, what songs make us cry? Our most amazing moments in any form of worship came at the great Urbana missionary conferences years back. And 18, 19,000 students would stand and they would sing these great hymns. And I can still recall the experience of my whole body just swelling with a sense of majesty and greatness and power, the ways you would like to think God has expressed himself. You don't have many experiences like that anymore. And we need to look at ourselves and ask, how does the church express the important things that are on God's heart?
I remember. I don't remember where I got this, but clearly something on God's heart is unity. And I got someplace, and it might have been from you even, this notion that singing together, and I've extended that to when we recite things together in church, that does something very subliminal in building unity. And a lot of our church traditions now, we don't recite things together. And when we sing, you don't know I'm singing, and I don't know you're singing because it's so loud. And I know I sound like an old person, and I am, and that's okay. And so, is there some stuff in just the practice of what we're doing in church that we've lost in the modern church movement without realizing we were losing it?
Well, let's talk about singing. For one would be singing, one would be public prayer,
Mm,
one would be public giving. Those three things, and maybe a fourth where you give people an informal time to engage with each other in a morning, are part of the evangelical fabric. But singing is absolutely essential in the life of the church as we've known it. When you sing together, you form a great choir.
mhm,
And in my generation and yours, we all knew the parts to the songing. We was singing. We we knew the four uh, parts to every hymn. Most of us didn't need a hymn book, but we there was something about singing where we made music together. We made something beautiful together. You might not have a great voice, or I may not have a great voice, but the other one does, and together we can really pound out some blessed music. That again, going back to Urbana, that was it. The singing prepared everybody for a message from the Word of God. Without singing, there was a great loss. To this day, I look for those moments where your heart just swells with a sense of the mightiness of the Lord that can be expressed in the poetry of singing. Um, Now what we do, and I don't want to be negative in this, but we've kind of delegated that to the worship band. And the worship band sings the parts, and the worship band knows most of the words for what we're going to sing. And you look around, and a lot of people are just standing there doing nothing, and that hurts me because I love to sing. I want to be part of the great singing group, and yet it seems like it's drifted away from us. I do get the hint that it's coming back. I was in a church service just a couple of weeks ago, and at the end of the service, the congregation stood and sang, "Great is thy faithfulness," and "Blessed Assurance," and one or two others. And you could look around and you could see the tears in the part coming down the cheeks of people as these songs developed that sense of watchfulness within us, that there's hope, and this is what draws us together.
Yeah. Yeah. And so some going back to this kind of world situation, there seems to be a lot of conversation starting to happen around end times. You're mentioning eschatological stuff earlier. And so when we're going through when there's war in the Middle East and war in Europe, and maybe there's going to be more war to come, and you mentioned all the other wars and pandemics, right? And so it is the right, and I don't know if everybody remembers, but there were plagues before the pandemic. I don't know if everybody, there was a locust plagues coming across Africa. Are we being silly when we look at all of that stuff and place it in an end times prism? Because people have done that for decades and centuries, and nothing's come of right. We've gotten closer for sure. But are we thinking about it? Are we wasting our time, and should we be thinking about it differently than wondering how does this relate to the end times?
My father was a part of a movement that was very, very end times oriented. They built their whole theology around it. And I somehow, in my generation, even as a boy, I felt put off by this. And in fact, it caused almost a lifelong split between my father and me. We felt estrangement because he wanted me to buy into his view of end times, and I wanted him to abandon that and maybe move in my direction. And we never did resolve it. I don't think my generation, at least here in the Northeast, is that concerned about eschatological issues. They may be in other parts of the country that I just don't know about. But it sounds to me more like an escapism than anything. And I just feel like until God says better in my heart, I'll try to give myself to present times and be much more the servant leader, and to be able to encourage people who are living in a dark time.
Because there is, it seems I see two extremes in the church. One is this one that everything that happens we connect it to, okay, then that's this event that happened, and that's this country doing, and I've always thought that was a risky space to be in. But it does seem to me there's another strain of the church that really doesn't pay attention to any book in any chapter of Revelation beyond 4, and as a result, a lot of us have a unformed theology around end times and the kingdom and things like that. Again, so is that a fair characterization? And is there a downside to us not at least understanding what's in Revelation?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair comment. I'm not sure, to be candid with you, that I have much to say about it. When you stop being a pastor, active pastor, producing sermons once and twice a week, some of that compelling necessity loses its pull on you. I find myself, and I hope no one will get the wrong idea who knows me, I find myself a little bit more interested in present times, how to speak the gospel as it needs to be heard on Main Street, rather than looking off into a future that could be right around the corner, or maybe not for the longest time. So it would be another voice that would say anything intelligent about that.
And so, Gordon, running out of time, what's on your reading list right now? Either what you're reading or what you think you want to get to next.
I'm just in the process of finishing a book called You're going to forgive me, my mind blanks out. How to Know Another Person by David Brooks.
Okay.
Brooks is a wonderful writer. He is a Jew, but he has powerful Christian insights that maybe to some extent come from, first of all, his engagement with any number of men and women here in the Northeast who are real thinkers and are thinking like Christians. And I think he's borrowed some thinking from them. He's also married to a woman, I'm told, that was a graduate of Wheaton College. And so his books carry this impact of Christian thinking. And this new book, which came out just a few weeks ago, How to Know a Person, really offers something that in our modern times we need to know better. He really talks very deeply about how two people or two or more people get to know each other and contribute to each other's lives. If I was a seminary professor today, I would make this book, at least for a while, important reading. I'd like to see some students go to work on what it has to say, because Brooks is very insightful as to where we are today in the breaking down of relationships. So I've been reviewing my David Brooks library. He's written 8 or 10 books, and every one of them carries with it something that a leader should be reading. So that's been something of my reading for the fall.
Gordon, that's great. Thank you for being with us today. And for giving us some stuff to think about and for sharing your perspective. But I can't begin to thank you enough for how gracious and how generous you've been with Vision New England and how the impact you've had on my life. And I couldn't tell you how many other lives of people around New England and the world. So I'm really grateful to you and to Gail. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that comment. When I was 6 years of age, my grandfather said to me one day, "Son, if God ever calls you to preach the Bible, come to New England. The lights are going out." And that became kind of a directing guide for my whole life, to love New England and be one of those who would invest in it as much as possible. So I'm very appreciative that you've come and made your contribution. Things have never been better.
Thank you. The lights are on here and you're a big part of the reason. So thank you.
Thank you.
And so I'd also like to thank our producer, Jess Mangano, and our listeners. This program is created by Vision New England, which accelerates evangelism by helping the church make disciples, do justice, foster unity so people want to know Jesus, and the lights are kept on. You can find more resources and donate at visionnewengland.org. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.